to Exodus chapter 3. The title to the message tonight is Leaving Your Egypt. Or you can say it different ways. Have you left your Egypt? However you would want to word that. But that's the thought tonight, is leaving your Egypt. Okay? So here in Exodus chapter 3, I'm going to tell you the beginning of the message, and we're going to jump to the very end because that's how my brain worked. Okay? So Exodus chapter 3, here Moses, he is, in verse 1 says, "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock the backside of the desert and came to a mountain of God, to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." I have to admit, if I would see a bush burning and it's not burning up, and in my mind, Moses, as he walked with the flock, he had his eye on this bush. It's on fire. It won't be long. It'll be going out. It don't take long for a bush to burn. And it kept burning. And in my mind, that's what he did. He's thinking, I'm going to go check this out. So he goes over there, and then in verse 4, it says, "And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet. For the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Now, all of this, we've read and we know all this that I've read so far, right? And you even probably know the next little part. I've read it, but I never saw it. Because the next little part said, "And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God." Well, we read that and we think, well, yeah, who wouldn't be? Right? You're standing there in a burning bush, the bush is burning, and all of a sudden a voice comes out of it telling you what told Moses here, that I am the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, and the God of Isaac. Would you not be afraid to look upon that bush? He hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So, why is this verse significant to me? Take, if you will, and turn to Exodus 33. Exodus chapter 33 and verse 18. This is why this verse stuck out to me. Because here in the very first, Moses, when he hears God, God is speaking to him, he hides his face out of fear. But in Exodus 33, verse 18, Moses, who's Moses speaking to? He's talking to God. And he asks God for something. Verse 18 of Exodus 33, and he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. What happened? What happened that Moses, in Exodus 3, he hid his face. But here in Exodus 33, verse 18, he wants to see more. What happened? And then where my thoughts went in this is you have Moses, right? Moses, who he's afraid to look upon God, but then, if you will, my bad graphing, he goes up, 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 and now he's over here, wants to know more. Where you have over here the children of Israel, who they cry out to God, and we'll look at some of these verses. They cry out to God. They want God to save them. They want God to deliver them, and they know who to call out to and cry out to, but as you follow them along, they get further and further away. What happens? Why? Well, so what I did, I went back and I started reading through Exodus chapter 3 all the way through, and I began to look at what did Moses have when he was in Egypt. Do you know what Moses had when he was in Egypt? Let's go back all the way back to the beginning of Exodus chapter 1. That's not all that way back. I held my place in Exodus 3, but in Exodus chapter 2, you know the story of Moses, right? How that okay, Okay, I'm gonna try not to bounce around a whole lot. But when I look at this, when I look at the children of Israel, you think about the children of Israel there when they were in Egypt. How did they get there? You remember how the children of Israel got to Egypt? It was from a famine, right? They came there when Joseph was there. Jacob moved up there when Joseph was there, and there they've lived. But now in in chapter 1 and verse 8 says, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them. Lest they multiply, and it come to pass that, when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land." Now, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that this guy who's saying this doesn't have a whole lot of common sense. Because if you have someone in your land that is mightier than you, that is more than you, I think the last thing I want to do is make them mad. I think the one thing I want to do, I want them to be good friends. So when an enemy does come in, well, who are they going to fight with? They're going to fight with me, but instead he does it the other way. And we understand that that's the providence of God, because here in verse 11 it says, "Therefore they did so, they did set over them taskmasters, and afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses." I don't know, I probably didn't pronounce them right, but they built cities for them. They made them slaves. They made them workers. They had them work building brick. And you know the story here, right? And it got to where that the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, told I can't remember what they're called now, but those that would go, the midwives, told the midwives to, look, when a boy is born, kill it. But they weren't. They feared God, and they didn't kill the boy children. And Pharaoh, the king said to them, "Why aren't you doing this?" And they said, "Because the Israelite women are not like the Egyptian women. By the time we get there, the baby's already born. So we can't do that." But they didn't, because they feared God. And so then the king said, "Okay, from now on, any boy is killed. Not just at birth, they're just killed." And so when Moses was born, the mother of Moses hid him for as long as she could. And then when she couldn't hide him anymore, she put him in a basket out in the lake, the water, the river, whatever you want to call it there. And Pharaoh's daughter came down. So I'm getting to the point. You look at what the Israelites had, and I'm going to do that over and over again, okay? I get names mixed up, and you talk about the Egyptians, you talk about the Israelites, you talk about Moses. So I don't know what names I'm going to mention, but those are the only three I'm really talking about. So just keeping that in mind. But so you have Moses. The daughter of Pharaoh came down, and she went to bathe in the water there, and saw the basket, and sent her maiden to go get the basket. What is it about a baby that is so precious? I mean, they're innocent. They are. We look at a little baby. I love it, with all of our children that were born, and any child that I've seen, I love looking into their eyes. I love it. Because the whites of their eyes are just beautifully white. And I look at that and I think of innocence. It's pure. They're not, I know they're little sinners, I know that, but they're not so touched by this world yet, if you will. And that you look at that child and they're innocent. And when Pharaoh's daughter opened up this basket and little Moses began to cry, what did she do? He didn't kill the child. But what did Moses become? Her son. So what was Moses in Egypt? He was a prince. Moses had it made. There was no reason for him to leave Egypt. Except for a calling, right? That was nagging at him that he needed to do. In verse 11 of chapter 2, it says here, "And it came to pass in those days This is after all of this that I just told you. In those days, when Moses was grown, he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. What I'm looking at here is a difference between Moses and the Israelites. Okay? Moses, if you read this verse, he went out and walked among his brethren. Moses is free. Moses is not working. Moses is not building bricks. Moses is not doing all of this stuff. But Moses is walking nonchalantly around the land, looking at his brethren. While his brethren are doing what? You read further in here in Exodus, and you'll find that what they say they did was sit beside the fire and eat bread. Right? That's what they do. They could just eat fish and bread to the full. Is that what they were doing? Not what they were doing. They were working, and you read these. So hopefully, in my mind, it's very clear that Moses was free. The Israelites had burdens. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 13, it says, "And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor." I've worked with my hands. I know what it is to do physical labor. There are some physical labors that I remember doing that I did not like. One of those things I think about, I hated working in the mud. I despised it. I wore what you call 5-buckle boots. Okay, you put them over your regular work boots. You get them 2 or 3 sizes too big. That way you can wear your regular boots. You know the worst thing to do is try to change shoes in the mud, because you will trip, and where's your foot going with the sock on it? In the mud. Now you got mud not only outside of your shoe, but you got it on the inside. So I never changed my shoes. I just wore those 5-buckle boots. And you take all day crawling around, walking around in the mud. I mean, your legs are like wet noodles. By the time you get done, you are so tired. But it's awful funny looking, I'm sure, because when you end of the day, you take those boots off, your feet don't weigh nothing. So you're like walking around almost like this, it feels like, walking around, because your feet are so light, and you're used to having to really strain to pick them up. I don't like that kind of work. But then that's what I think about here with working in rigor. I remember working in the heat, where that if you stood still, your arm would start to tingle. You got to have wind blowing over you. And there's no wind, you got to walk around. Working in rigor and hard, it's difficult. Verse 14 says, "And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor." There was nothing that they did that was easy. That's the life the Israelites had there in Egypt. But Moses, his life he had in Egypt was walking around. No rigor, no bitterness, no bondage. He was free. But when he saw this burden, in verse 11 of chapter 2, when he saw his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way. And when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses already he wanted to free his brethren. But it didn't work, did it? He got threatened. The next day he goes out. And it wasn't long that everybody knew what he'd done. And it says here, let's see. In verse 15 says of Exodus chapter 2, it says, "Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." Moses had to leave the Egyptians. Why? Because he killed an Egyptian. And Pharaoh, the king, it would be his grandpa, if you will, adopted grandpa, sought to kill him. So he left. So Moses, you look at this, Moses had it easy in Egypt. He was forced to leave. But you never find Moses looking back at how good he had it in Egypt. I've looked, I don't find the verse anywhere. That Moses looked back, and when he was in the wilderness, wandering around with these stiff-necked people, he never murmured to God and said, why don't you just leave me alone in Egypt where I could just be fine? I was just walking around, doing the same thing there that I was here, walking around the desert for 40 years. But I was okay there. You don't find that at all. The Israelites, they had it hard. They had it rough. You look in chapter 3. Well, hang on a minute. In chapter 2, verse 23, it says here, and it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God remembered their groaning, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. So they cried because of the reason of bondage. They cried unto the Lord. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 7, when God is talking to Moses, God tells Moses in verse 7, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Verse 9 says, now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. You read through here, and the adjectives of what describes their life in Egypt is not good. It's not a life to be desired. It's not a life that any of us would think, oh, that sounds really nice. We wouldn't want that. The Egyptians were crying, the Israelites were crying for deliverance from that. So what makes the difference here? Why is it that the Israelites, they're crying out for God to deliver them? Look here in Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. So here, you know what's in Exodus chapter 20, right? That this is the Ten Commandments, when God gives the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel. And you look at this, and you read, you start reading here, I think it's in chapter 19. You read chapter, not now, but chapter 19, 20, 21, 22, and on down to, I think it's around chapter 30. You read these chapters and pay attention to Moses went up, Moses came down. You pay attention to this because when you read this and you follow this out, when God gives the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel, and you can read over in Deuteronomy also, I don't have that marked here where that's at in Deuteronomy, but Moses tells the children of Israel in Deuteronomy, because you know Deuteronomy is all about Moses speaking, and he's telling them to remember some things. And that's what he's telling them. And there in Deuteronomy, Moses reminds the children of Israel, he says, you heard his voice. You heard him. So the Ten Commandments, I've always thought this, and in the movies they portray it this way, which is wrong. Well, I know it's amazing the movie was wrong. But that Moses is up on the mount, and God has given Moses the Ten Commandments, and then Moses comes down and he gives them to the children of Israel. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that Moses is down with the children of Israel, and God is speaking, and they're hearing these Ten Commandments being given. Okay? Why is that important? It goes to this question of what makes the difference. What happened here? Because so God gave the children of Israel these 10 commandments. He gets finished with all of this. Verse 18, it says, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they were moved and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. But God speaking to them scared them, just as it did with Moses in chapter 3, right? Moses hid his face from them, but Moses never said, oh no, I don't want to hear from you. The children of Israel told Moses, we'll hear from you. But look at verse 20 and understand what's being said here in verse 20. And Moses said unto the people, fear not. Don't be afraid of him, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not. Moses is telling the people, look, God is speaking to you personally so that you can get to know him. Look, it's one thing to talk to somebody over the phone, right? And we even have this thing nowadays that you can look at them on your screen, right? But is that the same as sitting right beside somebody and talking to them? You can even text them, put your words out there on your speech out there on words and send it to them, right, in a text. It's not the same. You don't get to know somebody by that way. It's kind of funny. Our world is going that they think they're very social because they have thousands of friends on social media. They've never met a third of them or 7/8 of them, whatever. There's something to listening. There's something to speaking. And God wanted to prove to them who he was for the purpose that they wouldn't sin. Not that they would ever be perfect, but that they would have a desire. So now we're getting to the bottom of this and what happened because Moses listened to God. Moses got to have a relationship with God. God even tells Miriam and Aaron, look, if I speak to Moses as one speaketh to his friend face to face. Now, does that mean that God came down and stood in front of him as a man? That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is just as you sit next to your friend and talk, that's the way God talked to Moses. Not necessarily in a being there, but Moses heard God and God listened to Moses. It was his best friend speaking, if you will. Moses got to know God. But the children of Israel said, no. No, if he talks to us, we're going to die. And Moses is telling them, no, it's just the opposite. If you don't talk to him, you're going to die. You need to talk to him. You need to listen to him. But the children of Israel, they didn't want this. Look over. I've completely messed up my notes and everything here. Look over in Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32 here. The children of Israel, they're couple thoughts running through my mind. Thinking about the children of Israel and about Moses. How that the children of Israel, in the first of Exodus, the children of Israel, who did they cry out to for help? They cried out to God for deliverance, for help. And God says, I've heard their cry. But in Exodus chapter 32, Moses, now here, Moses has went up on the mount after the 10 Commandments were given. Then Moses goes up on the mount, and he's up there still. He's still up there, okay? He's talking to God, and God is giving him not the 10 Commandments, but the law. He's giving him some other things. And as God talks to Moses, then God says, look, you need to get back down there, because this people has made themselves God. And so, but here in Exodus chapter 32, now Moses was up on the mount for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay? And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we want not what became of him. Now you think about what they're saying right there. They're asking Aaron, they don't know what happened to Moses, right? Moses is gone. So who are the children of Israel following? What was it that they said in Exodus chapter 20 to Moses? They said unto him in verse 19, Speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. Who are they following? Because here in Exodus 32, they say, look, we don't know what happened to Moses, the one that brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Was Moses the one that brought him up out of the land of Egypt? Was Moses the one that parted the Red Sea? Was Moses the one that saw the tree and said, hey, this will work to throw in the water and it won't be bitter anymore? Was Moses the one that did all that? No, he was not. God was. But they wouldn't speak to God. They only spoke to Moses. They're following Moses. And then they tell Aaron to make us gods, which shall go before us. Because Moses is gone. God doesn't mean a lot to them anymore. They're getting further and further away. And where is God bringing them to? To the promised land. The land that flows with milk and honey. He's giving this generation the promise that he gave to Abraham. But they know all of this. But why? Why are they going so far away from God? We have a lot of promises from God, don't we? We do have. We have a lot of promises. And I know a lot of you, I know all of you actually, pretty much. And a lot of you, I know some of your favorite promises, mainly because you put them in a book. I've read the book, right? So, and I've talked to you. I know some of your favorite verses. Those verses that mean a lot to you. You know my favorite verse. We have these promises. And one of the things that intrigued me about the Israelites is because I see me in them. I want desperately to see me in Moses, but I don't. I see me in, and I don't care for that a whole lot. I have promises from God. I have things that His word, I know it's true. I know it's right. But sometimes I follow more of what I see than what I know. Just like the Israelites. So I'm not faulting the Israelites. I'm not saying that, well, I am saying they were wrong in what they did, but I'm saying, look, the Old Testament was given to us for an example. It's what it's given to us for. These accounts are true. The way the Israelites lived, the way that they fought against God. Here in verse 4 of Exodus 32, Aaron told them, they go to Aaron, and tell him to make us gods. And so Aaron says, bring me all your golden earrings. So they bring him his golden earrings, and he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a molten calf, and he said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. What? What? Why is Aaron there? Just curious question. Why is Aaron there? Because Moses wasn't going to go. Moses kept giving excuses. I can't do it, Lord. I can't say it. I can't this. I can't that. Just like we do sometimes. And God said, fine. And now it's coming back to get him. Verse 6. And they rose, verse 5. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. You really think it's going to be a feast to the Lord? It's not going to be accepted. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. Now, I'm not going to get into any details or anything, but that play is horrible. That is what false doctrines will bring. False teaching, false gods, worshiping of false gods. And so then the Lord tells Moses in verse 7, get thee down, for the people that thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. I love the wording here, because you look at this and you word this, you read this. Let's see. God says in verse 7, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt. And then in verse 11, Moses besought the Lord his God and said, Lord, why dost thou wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with mighty hand? Nobody wants to claim bringing him out of Egypt. You know, I'm just making it funny there. But Moses is not saying, I didn't do it. He's saying, I didn't do it. He said, Lord, you did this, you know, and you did this by your power, by your might. But you look here in verse, I think I'm in 32 still. Yeah, 32 and verse 31. Exodus 32 and verse 31. So, verse 30 says, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said unto the people. So, I'm skipping a lot of stuff here. Moses comes down off the mount. He sees a golden calf, and what does he do with the 2 tables of stone? He breaks them, right? What does he do? You remember? He asked Aaron, what have you done? What did Aaron say? I took the golden earrings and threw them in the fire, and this is what come out. What am I supposed to do? So we worshiped it. Is that what the verses we read that happened? Because the verses I read said that after Aaron had, I can't even remember how it worded it, how he fashioned it. He made it a golden calf. He did it. Now he's telling Moses, I don't know what happened. It's just what happened. Sounds like a lot of our kids. We were kids. I shouldn't just say our kids. We were kids too. I don't know. I hate when my parents ask me that. Why did you do that? I don't know. And sometimes I was telling the truth. I really didn't know. But Moses, he's down there with them, and then he takes that calf and he grinds it up. He mashes it up until it's a fine powder, and he puts it in the water and tells them, drink it. Drink it. Nasty. But you look at something. No, it's right here. So Moses ground the calf up. He made them drink it. And then in verse 30, he tells them, Moses tells the people, ye have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure, I shall make an atonement for your sin. That's something. That's something. And Moses, in verse 31, Moses returned unto the Lord and said, oh, this people have sinned a great sin and have made them gods of gold. He goes up there, and Moses confesses to God what the people have done. But you think Moses understands some things, doesn't he? He understands what God is doing with the children of Israel. He understands who they are. They are God's chosen people. And Moses understands that the world is watching. But who do they need to be seeing? The children of Israel, they don't really understand what God's doing. They don't really understand why they're where they're at. They don't really understand that the world is watching, and what they need to see is God. That's what Moses understands all of that. And here he goes up to God and he tells God that, look, this people has sinned and made themselves gods of gold. Yet now, so in verse 32, yet now if thou wilt forgive their sin, will you forgive them of this, Lord? If not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book, which thou hast written. I struggled with this part for a long time. Because why on earth would Moses go up and say, Lord, if you won't forgive them, punish me? And I always looked at it like he loved the people so much that he's willing to die for them. He does. He cares for them. But why does he care for them? Because they're God's people. Who does he love more than the people? He loves God more than the people. He wants God's will to be done. What is it that God also understands? That Moses understands. When you sin against God, there's punishment has to be given. He understands all that. And he's asking here, Lord, if you won't forgive them, then punish me. That's an amazing thing that I read, that I look at that. It's amazing to me. The people don't understand what Moses said, I'll go up and make an atonement for your sin. Either God will forgive you, or I'm going to ask him to punish me. The people don't understand any of that. And you read through here that Moses is up here, he's talking to God. And we'll read further down through here in verse 33. And the Lord said unto Moses, whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. He tells Moses, no. Therefore now go, lead the people unto the place which I have spoken unto thee. Behold, mine angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And you look at this, to me, this is a great warning, okay? The people made the calf, the golden calf. Aaron made the golden calf because people asked him to. They worshiped that golden calf. Moses, he ground it up in the powder and made them drink it. And there was quite a few of them that died. But now you read this, and verse 35 says, and the Lord plagued the people because they made the calf which Aaron made. Moses punished them, but God said, I will too. Sometimes we get punishment from the deeds we do from this world. That doesn't mean that God says he doesn't have his punishment coming to you. You think about that. They got punished from Moses and from God. That, to me, that's a great warning that we need to heed. But Moses, you read on through here in chapter 33 that he goes down, he ends up back up, and he took in chapter 33 of verse 7, God is, the people are not listening, they're not obeying. And in verse 7 says, and Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. The tabernacle used to be inside the camp. But because there was disobedience there and all of this, Moses moved the tabernacle outside the camp. So now the people, when Moses goes to talk to God, you can read this, that the people, they come and sit at their door, their tents, and watch him walk away outside the camp, afar off, to go talk to God. And this is when Moses, when he's talking to the Lord, he says to him in verse 18 in chapter 33, and he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. That is an amazing, when you read this, how that God said that, look, you can't look upon my glory. You can, but what I'll do, there's a cleft in this rock, and what I'll do, I'll put you in that cleft, and I'll cover that up with my hand, and I'll walk by. And as I get by, I will uncover you, and you can see my hind parts as I walk by. What happened to Moses? When he came down off the mount, there was something different about him, wasn't there? Remember what it was? His face shone. People were afraid of him. They said, look, when you're not talking to us about what God's doing, you need to cover your head up. That scares us. But I want you to think about something here. And I don't know if I can find the verse right offhand. In 1 John, 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 2. 1 John 3, verse 2. And you think about that, Moses was on that mount again. I do believe it was 40 days again, I think. You have to check that out and see. Might have been a little bit more than that, but I don't remember exactly. But when he came down off that mount, his face shone. Here in 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, it says, Behold, or beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. No cleft of the rock, no hiding of the hand. You think about that. Moses saw the hind parts of God, and his face shone from it. One of these days, we're going to see him as he is. And I was at a conference, and Brother Dan Hillard read this verse, and he mentioned this, which intrigued me, so I studied it out, and he's right. Look up in 1 John, as he is. Just that little phrase. If you've never done that, look it up. It's pretty amazing. Because one of these days, Moses was afraid, and he hid his face because he was afraid to look upon God. But then he got to the place where he wanted more. I want more. I want to not just know your ways, Lord, I want to see your glory. And so God showed him what Moses could handle. God showed him. Do we want to see more of God? Which way are we going? Are we growing closer and closer to God to where we're learning more and more about him? Or are we getting further and further away that we don't even want to hear his voice? Which way are you going? Which way am I going? Because if you're here today and you're saved, one of these days, you're going to see him face. I mean, right now, we can't see him face to face. But one of these days, we're going to be able to look upon him. We're going to be changed. And we'll be able to be with him throughout all eternity. Which direction are you going in your spiritual life? Are you getting closer to him, or are you getting closer to things of this world? Which do you fall under? The Israelites, or Moses? Here today and you're lost. Jesus Christ is the only way of salvation. He's it. There's no other way. There's no other way through salvation but Jesus Christ. Repent and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and he will save you. Thank you.